My turn too.
So sweet, but they went. Look like these pants are. Yeah, I love them. Has its own story of health. That's totally good. Yeah, very elegant. It's classic. Yeah. Yeah. I leave it for a new bag. I leave that on the next one. I have to call. I'm like,
Oh, no, that is just not yet. We still have to do.
I probably don't because I threw one in there last minute.
I just.
There you go. Thank you. It's actually not been I had to make copies. Oh, I love it.
Oh, I know. I don't know if you ever
Sorry.
You can eat
some more.
What am I doing?
Hey, how are you?
So then, yeah, that's the only one. But I thought that. Oh, no, her and I emailed. Because I had a question.
Yeah.
You guys are all going to the court too, right? Yeah, I know, I'm in Carolina. Carry on air. Yeah. Thursday, yeah. Well, no, it's her Thursday, that's Thursday, that she's always got the meeting. No, they're looking to change. Good morning. Hi, good morning. Hello.
Full house. How are you? I know, it is.
I tried.
No pressure.
Yeah, or.
Yeah. Hope they have a lot of files. Let's go. Yeah.
We're all set. Hi, everyone. I'm Neda. I'm the manager of pre-construction for Royal LePage, your community and connect. Bear with me. Officially, my first course in the academy, so you're all my guinea pigs today, or I'm your guinea pig rather. So, so just bear with me. We're gonna make this work together. We're gonna make it. You know, my intention is to make it as interactive as possible, so that if you have any questions, you can ask me, and I'm just going to basically share my experiences with you. Just a little tidbit about me. I've been in pre-construction and real estate since 2005, and I've done both ends of the spectrum. After I was tired of resale, I got into it. From the get-go, actually, I was in pre-construction. I worked at a company where the owner of the company was a developer, and so I was exposed from very early on into the world of pre-construction. I was at the sales office level, representing the builder. I also helped with the selling of the remainder of the product, resale of the leftover units or assignments, if you will. And I've done the basically now for a few years with Royal LePage. I've been doing the end where we're representing the builder, we're pricing product for the developers, and representing the inside of the project. So I'm just going to wait for a few more minutes so everyone can settle down. There's, I think we might be able to squeeze in. Yes. Sorry about that. No, no problem. Take your time. Are we good? I'm popular.
Yeah.
Okay. So, I know a lot of you are obviously familiar with the world of pre-construction, and but I'm just going to give a quick overview of what is pre-construction, what it entails, and we'll basically go from there. So pre-construction is when your clients are buying something that hasn't been built in most cases. It does not exist except on paper right now. And this could be a condo apartment, it could be a townhouse, it could even be a detached property. And so the reason why I have freehold condo is because nowadays you're finding that there's a lot of townhouses that are being categorized as freehold, but there is a condo element there. And what that means is there's potentially a shared road element. For example, it's a complex where the drive-in is a path that isn't an existing street, and so the developer has to create that road, and then that road becomes part of the condo corporation where it has to be maintained, and the clients and the purchasers will have to pay a maintenance fee for the upkeep of that road. They also provide snow removal, garbage disposal for that complex, and so there's that condo element for that property. But the actual structure and the actual house or the townhouse is a freehold without any condo corporation attached to it. The condo apartments are obviously, as you all know, where the most fun is to be had. There's a lot of interest there. There's a lot of money to be made, because in most cases they pay about 4% commission. I have seen cases of 5%, but you know, a project like One Bloor, for example, where it's a really popular project, there's a lot of interest there. The developer started the project at 3% commission, and then later on, as the remaining units were offered for sale, then he increased it to 4%. With most of the detached properties, you'll find freehold detached properties, you'll find that because for a long period of time they were very popular and people would line up, the individual basically members of the public would line up for these properties, the developers would not pay commission. They didn't need us to help them move the product, and so they were not paying commission. I have a feeling this might change a little bit, and we're going to start seeing that those detached homes where the developer does need assistance of the real estate population in order to make their product move, so that we might see commission coming in. So in most cases, you'll see basically a floor plan, and this floor plan is going to be obviously some developers will offer a 3D version of it, so it's a virtual program where you can see the walkthrough of the size of the units, the living room, the family room, the kitchen. Some of them actually have models of their kitchen and bathrooms in their sales offices, but a lot of times you'll find very minimum and very minimal basically buildup of these things, just because pre-construction has gotten so big that developers will spend less and less money advertising their product. But in most cases, they'll give you a floor plan, and you can basically walk your client through the floor plan. In general, most of the basically lingo is the same, so you'll see WD for washer and dryer, and they might indicate fridge, and they might just mark it with an X or whatever. But if you go into the sales office, and the sales agents of the site can walk you through what each of the little squares or the boxes on the floor plan will mean. But so then your client is purchasing your property off the floor plan, and they'll provide you a price list at the sales office level. And this price list, in almost 99% of the cases, did you want to grab a chair? Are you sure? In most cases, that price list, the price that you see on the price list is for the lowest floor available of that unit and that model, and that the price goes up incrementally based on whatever the floor premium is. Sometimes if the building is very tall, they will have a premium mid-building. For example, it's $1,000 per floor starting on the second floor, but on 20th floor, there's a jump up $10,000, and then it will go up $1,000 again per floor. So these are things that, again, at the sales office level, the sales staff can provide you information for. The finishes and the renderings. So the renderings are basically any pictures and artists' views and visuals that is provided of what the finishes would look like, what the kitchen would potentially look like, what the lobby would look like, what the gym would look like. So these are all called generally the renderings of the product. The amenities, they'll have renderings of the amenities, and amenities could be gym, sauna, swimming pool, if there's a guest suite, if there's a party room, if there's an outdoor patio area with barbecue units and whatnot. So these are part of the amenities of the building. And in some cases, some of them are open. So for example, the gym is open to the residents, and they can go in using their fob key anytime they wish. Some of them, like the party room, like the guest suite, need to be booked and reserved through the concierge on the building management. And all of those rules and regulations will basically come up once the building is built and the management staff is on site. The down payment and deposit is basically the money that your client has to submit towards the purchase of this property, just like the down payment that or the deposit that we have on our resale product. The developers will dictate to us what sort of down payment they're looking for. With the condo apartments, we're finding more and more that they're looking at about 20 to 25% deposit. Your client does have the option of putting more money down, but with the bank. So closer to the time of their closing, and we'll talk about what closing and what occupancy and all of that means, but closer to the time of closing, when they're applying for their mortgage, if they wish to put down more money down towards the deposit, so they've already given 25% to the developer, and the bank will look at that as their down payment, and they wish to deposit more, and so they'll basically put down extra money with the bank so that their mortgage payments can come down. That's always a nice way of keeping their deposits down. Yes.
What's the deposit protection for new builds?
So generally speaking, at the time of signing, your client will have to submit all these post-dated checks. So with most products, you'll find that At signing, they will require a check for $5,000. Now, this $5,000 or $10,000, depending on the price of the property, will not be cashed during their rescission period. And that rescission period is the 10-day cooling off period, also referred to as the conditional period. So the developer will hold on to that check. Once the deal is firm, that's when they process your first payment. Generally speaking, and this varies from builder to builder, 30 days from the day of signing, your client will have to basically come up with another 5% deposit minus that $5,000. So if it says balance of 5%, it means your 5% minus the $5,000 or the $10,000 that was submitted at the time of signing. Then another, 5% in about 60 to 90 days or 120 days. Then another 5% in 180 days or it depends on the developer, how generous they are, how much they want to spread it out. But generally speaking, within the first 6 months or so, the developer is looking to collect about 10% towards the purchase of this property. So 10% deposit is normal within 6 months. And then it's spread out. So then they might do another 5% at occupancy, and then that will add up to your 20 or 25%, however much the deposit is.
What part is protected under the code? So if you're hypothetically buying a $500,000 condo and you're bringing 20% over 360 days.
So my understanding was that it used to be $20,000 to $40,000 through Tarion,
Yes.
but they've recently changed that for condo townhouses. They're protected up to $100,000 and about 60 or 80, if I'm not mistaken, on the condo apartments, and that's something we can confirm through Tarion. They recently changed it. I don't know if it's in effect yet or not. There was talks of what this means is maybe I can explain this. So there's an entity called Tarion, and Tarion is basically an entity that protects the purchasers of new product, new construction. This could be houses, this could be townhouses, this could be apartment buildings. And so the Tarion will oversee that the developer is delivering the product according to the schedule that they've provided, the delivery schedule, occupancy period, and their closing falls within that period of time that they've delivered to Tarion, as well as the fact that in the event your client, the developer is not able to deliver the product, the deposit is somewhat protected and there's an insurance protection on that deposit, as well as the fact once the building is built, the Tarion will allow your buyers to do an inspection prior to taking occupancy, to do another inspection 30 days after taking over the premises, as well as I believe there's one at 1 year term, so that if at any opportunity, if there's any deficiencies, any structural problems with the unit, then your client has an opportunity to report that, and the developer is responsible to fixing that product for your client. We can look into, during the break, I'll look into that and we can further talk about it.
But that deposit doesn't go to the builder per se, it goes to the lawyer in trust.
So with condo apartments where you have quite a few units, even with townhouses, if you have more than a certain number of units, then developer will basically work with a lawyer to hold their money in trust. But I'm finding more and more with this smaller products, with the smaller sites where there's 20, 30, 40 townhouses, for example, the developer will hold on to that deposit. Yes, it's in their trust, but they're holding on. So the deposit is made directly to the developer. So I've seen that as well. So it doesn't always sit in a lawyer's account. So we talked about the down payment and deposit. Incentives. So what are incentives? So these builders will basically try to make their product as appealing as possible. Number one is their finishes. Number two is their price. Of course, number one is prices. But they try to make it appealing by having competitive pricing, by having beautiful finishes, as well as providing special incentives. And these incentives could be something similar to having parking and locker included in the price of the purchase of this condo apartment, or having the assignments or development and levies capped, for example, And I'll talk about what assignments are, so don't worry about it. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar, and I'm sure many of you have done assignments, but it's part of pre-construction, and it's actually exciting, but it could be challenging a little bit, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. So these incentives are basically something that is not always negotiable, especially at the beginning of the launch of a project. It is set, just like the prices. With a developer, the prices are set. You cannot negotiate prices. In most cases, of course, you always have, there are that exceptions occasionally that the product is left over and the builder wants to move them, so they might do something on pricing, they might do something on incentive. But in general, what we're seeing nowadays is because there's so much demand, developers don't have to give too much. They give enough to move the product, but that's about it. So in most cases, you won't be able to negotiate at a sales office level. The 10-day rescission period, we kind of touched on that. That's the period in which the agreement is conditional. And keep in mind that most of the sites will basically mark your agreement of purchase and sale, and tell you that your 10-day cooling off period starts as of now. Always make sure that the 10-day and that you communicate that with the sales office. Your 10-day or your client's 10-day cooling off period will start from the moment your client gets their package from the developer. So not when they're signing, because not always is there a representative of the builder on site to execute and sign on behalf of the vendor, and hand over a copy of the agreement to your client. So they might ask you to leave and come back the next day or in a couple of days to pick up your package and your copy of the agreement. That's when the 10-day cooling off period should legally start, because that's when your client will have the opportunity to bring that agreement of purchase and sale as well as the disclosure booklet to the lawyer to have it reviewed. So that's quite important, yes.
10 days, it's a business day?
No, it's never business days, it's regular days. Statutory holidays will count as well, in most cases, Christmas Day, all of those will count. Developers are a little bit lenient when it comes to the holidays, especially around Christmas and New Year's and whatnot, but you still need to ask for an extension. So an extension is something that is allowed, but you have to ask that within the 10 days. You can't ask for an extension when the time is up. And at a launch of a development, the builder might be willing to only do half a day, at most a couple of days I've seen. But as the site gets a little bit older and there's leftover inventory, they might be a little bit more flexible. I've seen as much as a week of extension, 10 days. Hi.
Is 10 days governed that it has to be a minimum of 10 days, or can a developer say, we want the cooling off period to be 5 days?
So it is governed, but I'm finding that right. But I'm finding some of the developers nowadays are enforcing a 3-day period where they're saying, no, my site is a freehold site, because in most cases a freehold product, when your client signs it, it's firm on the spot, it's freehold. And so if that is the case, you can ask for that. And in most cases, they will provide a copy of the agreement prior to it being signed. And so you can have it reviewed before your client signs it. But then the minute they sign it and it's executed, it's firm on the spot for freehold properties. But with condos, they must get 10 days. But I found recently that the developer insists on, especially when the market was really hot and they could, sort of push the envelope a little bit. Oh, my product is freehold, I will only give you 3 days. So, in a court of law, they could argue that if they wanted to, but it's up to the discretion of your client to take that or not. Yes.
Yeah, during the cooling off period, the buyer has a right to cancel the contract without any reason. Yeah.
Yes, they usually would like to know for their marketing reason what the reason, what is the reason you're canceling, because having been on the sales site, basically on the inside, we want to know if we can save the deal somehow. So they will ask, and you're free to give them whatever reason, a very sort of generic answer is the financing didn't work out, and so they can't really argue that. But if they say, oh, I don't like this layout, then we might try to sell another layout to them, you know, and as an agent, you want that deal not to fall apart as much as the site staff do. And so, yeah, your client does have, even to the last minutes of, even if the sales office is closed, they have until midnight of that evening, the 10th day, to cancel. So via email or having your client's lawyer send an email, you can still be off the hook, basically.
So as soon as you sign the contract, you have to give the check
Yes.
and.
Yes.
you-
I'll talk about the procedure. Yes.
So it's not a legal prerequisite to have 10 days of a rescission period. It's arbitrary depending on the builder, what they establish.
It is legal with condo apartments, especially where there's a booklet. It is legal.
So it is a legal requirement.
Absolutely.
So basically, if one builder says, well, we want to do 3 days, and your client decides to back out after 7 days, their lawyer would tell them that they have a legal right to back out, and basically they can.
I mean, personally, if a developer tells me your client only has 3 days and that my client really badly wants this product, right away I will inform the lawyer that this is what the builder is saying to us. Can you please address this and make sure that you
Of
have it
course,
in
but
writing?
Worst comes to worst, you know, if it happens, they would have a legal right to back out.
Yes, if it's a condo product, definitely. So basically the way it works is when you walk into the sales office, I'll talk about the scenario of the sales office, and then we'll go into the, but the lawyer review can come into. So when you go into a sales office, for example, and the sales office is a structure from which they're selling a pre-construction product. It could be from a Royal LePage office, for example, or it could be an actual site that was built by the developer to basically sell this product out of. I've even seen these sort of like the portables that are sort of plopped on site, and they add a couple of stairs to it, and in you go, and inside it's finished, and they put up the floor plans and the renderings and whatnot, and they're signing. Chair and table, that's all you need. So when you walk in, and in most cases they'll ask you to register yourself. Who are you? We want to know who you are walking into our sales office. So if you're going in with clients, I mean, personally, I like to go and familiarize myself with the site before I bring my clients along. So I know if they ask me, oh, well, where is this building located? Even though the sales staff will explain that for you, but you want to kind of, as the person selling the product and collecting the 4% at the end, you want to know what it is that you're selling to your client. So try to familiarize yourself with that. But when you walk in with your clients, you want to register your clients with that developer. So they say, oh, hi, I'm here with my clients, and we want to see what you have. And they usually have a registration form that you can fill out by hand, or they might have an iPad if they're very tech savvy, and you can fill in the information of your clients. Make sure that they recognize that you are the representing party and you're representing the buyers. You can hand them your business cards. Get to know the sales staff on site. Be nice to them because we're going to need them in the long run. And then, they're going to take over. The site staff will take over and walk you through the project. They'll tell you, okay, here's our model. Here, the building is this tall, and we're going to have this many units, and we're going to be located at this cross section, and we're going to have our prices start at whatever, and they'll hand a package to you, including the floor plans and the price list and whatnot, and they'll walk you through the product. And if you walk over here, this is a rendering of our amenities, and over here is a sample of what our bathrooms and our kitchen would look like. And they'll even tell you everything you see here is standard, or this drawer is an upgrade, or this island is an upgrade and whatnot. So they'll walk you through the entire thing. Once your client is basically satisfied with what they've seen and they narrow down their choices and they're actually ready to put pen to paper and sign a contract, and that might happen that day or the next day. And if they want to come back a week from that day, you still want to accompany your client, because until the moment that agreement is signed, I want to be with my client to make sure that I'm the person that they take down as the selling agent, and I basically get my co-op agreement, and I'm collecting my commission. So just accompany your client there. If they want to sign and are ready to purchase a unit, what they do is they have a worksheet. So that it's basically a form that asks for the name of your client, first name, last name, their date of birth, in most cases their social insurance number, their email address is very important because nowadays Tarion is communicating with your clients only through email. So make sure you tell your client if this email address changes ever, as well as your phone number and your address, you want to inform the site in writing. They have to send an email. They can forward it to you. You can forward it to the site so that they can in turn inform their lawyers, so that the lawyer can inform Tarion, and that your client is basically getting all the communication through. So make sure that because in most cases, this period from the moment they purchase until they become the owner could take 4 or 5 years sometimes. So it's possible that their address changes and whatnot, to make sure that the developer can communicate with your client. So you fill out that information, that worksheet, and you indicate what unit your client's interested in. Now this scenario is when the sales office is open and it's not a launch of a product. I'll talk about launch because the launches are completely different. So then the developer's representative says, okay, just give us a few minutes, we'll prepare the paperwork. They'll do the paperwork, so you're not typing up an offer for these units. In most cases, 99.9% of the cases, you're writing this on the builder's agreement of purchase and sale, which happens to be about 40-50 pages long, and it will include basically a bunch of clauses and schedules that the Tarion is part of as well, and it will indicate. It will also include the floor plan of the unit, as well as a page that's called acknowledgement. Now that acknowledgement page or disclosure, Schedule D in some cases, depending on how the agreement is set up for that developer, that page is where you want the date to indicate the time at which you're picking up the copy of the agreement. If the acknowledgement, in most cases, the acknowledgement page is dated the same time your client's signing it, that's fine as long as they're getting their copy that day. Make sure the date on the acknowledgement is reflecting the date at which you're picking up that copy of the agreement. Otherwise, your client might have lost a little bit of time. So they'll prepare the agreement. You sit down with your client and the sales staff on site, and they'll walk you through, okay, sign here, initial here, sign here, initial here. They'll do the whole thing. You just have to nod and say, yes, it's fine. You can just sign it. A lot of people are nervous about signing a 50-page agreement and want to read through it. It's going to take hours for someone to read through that agreement of purchase and sale, unless they're a lawyer that is familiar with this basically type of agreement. I really recommend you discourage your clients from reading the agreement on site, because you could be sitting there for a few hours, as well as the fact that if they ask you any questions, we're not going to be able to explain the meaning of any of these clauses to them. So this is really good reading material for their lawyer. And this is a standard agreement. Believe you me, you're going to have an opportunity to have your lawyer review it. That's why they're giving us the 10 days. So just try to basically assure your clients that it's fine and that they're not, in this stuff and they can't. There's a way out. They have their 10-day cooling off period, and that's the reason that they have that, so that the lawyer can review this paperwork. Yes.
Just a quick question. Do you know how much lawyers generally charge to review that document?
So they will charge a few $100s, and that depends on lawyer to lawyer. A lot of the lawyers will not charge your client anything at the time of reviewing, given that they're basically chosen to do the closing, and so everything will be charged at closing. If your client chooses to change lawyers, they might receive an invoice for a few $100s for reviewing the paperwork. Yes.
Hi, I have a question. You mentioned make sure to be with your client at the time of registration. What if the clients were, looking online and they registered online for something, and then they call you and they said, oh, well, listen, we saw this, we registered already, can we go to
Online is fine. You'll actually find that a lot of clients not unknowingly will walk into a sales office. Oh, we were just driving to the grocery store, we saw the site, we walked in. Make sure to educate them and let them know, listen, now that you're working with me, if you do happen to go to a site without me, have my business card on you, or let them know that you're working with me and that I'm your agent. If I find out that my client has walked into a sales office, the first thing I'll do is I'll call them up. I'll call the sales office as soon as I find out from my clients that they went to the site and they're interested. I understand my client was on their way to the, to a wedding, and they saw your sales office and they walked in. They're my clients. They're under, we're under contract, and I didn't know they're coming. And make sure you visit that sales office at the first opportunity. You have to give them your business card and have the site acknowledge that you're representing these buyers. I'll be sure to accompany them moving forward.
Basically, if they sign up without you.
Sorry?
It can be fixed if your clients
Yes.
walk in and sign.
In most
register
cases,
without
the
you.
developers are flexible when it comes to this because they understand that buyer agency agreement might exist, and that, the clients might unknowingly have had registered directly with the developer. And many of I register on all these sites as well, and so the general public also does. But a lot of times you can't help it, and so just communicate with the sales office. And in most cases, they're fine with that. What were we talking about? So you're signing the agreement, and that agreement is done. Your client has submitted their post-dated checks. They get a copy of it or some sort of a receipt for these checks. Then you're given this basically thick agreement of purchase and sale. In some cases, your client's signing more than one copy. The one copy, 2 copies, I've even seen 5 copies, because all the lawyers want original copies and whatnot. The developer wants an original copy, and they must give your client an original copy of the agreement of purchase and sale, and also a booklet. And this booklet is basically equivalent to what used to be called an estoppel certificate, and now it's called the what's the book? The one that you get for condos. Status certificate. Thank you. Status certificate, and that's basically it's an equivalent of the same thing, but for brand new property. So this booklet, along with that agreement of sale, has to go to the lawyer right away. A lot of times, even though it takes them a few hours to review it, lawyers will take their time doing that, and you want to have that extra time in order to negotiate anything between the lawyers. So make sure you get that to your client's lawyer as soon as possible. Be sure to pick a lawyer that is well versed in the world of pre-construction, because not every real estate lawyer out there is familiar with pre-construction agreements and whatnot. And a lot of times I find that they're dissecting the agreement way too much, and the deal falls apart in the interim. So, some clauses and some fees are standard, and every developer is charging it, and the lawyer might try to negotiate that, but that could basically mean that they're raising awareness to something that isn't negotiable, and they're basically raising these red flags for your client, and the client will get nervous, and then I want to walk away because my lawyer says this clause is whatever. But as a matter of fact, it might be a standard clause within the pre-construction industry. Do we have a question here?
I was gonna say, I had a deal in about a year and a half ago with pre-construction, having kitchen water, where the lawyer had no idea that the HST could be rebatable on closing and how.
Yes.
So my clients had almost lost 2 units on it, and
That's
so
right.
I referred them to another lawyer who knew what he was doing. Yeah.
There you go. Yes.
Do you know some lawyers that you can recommend?
Yes. We'll send me an email afterwards, and I'll forward you something.
Is the booklet really part of the package?
Yes.
Or
Well, yes, definitely.
I went to one, it signed, they didn't give me a booklet for the status.
Did they give you a copy of the agreement?
Yeah,
Did they give you a USB that contained that booklet?
no.
Okay, talk to me afterwards.
Okay.
Okay, any more questions? Okay, so then these documents, and a lot of times the developer now is basically trying to be environmentally friendly, and it does not provide a printed physical agreements. They're actually your client signing on an iPad, and they will electronically email a copy of the agreement and that booklet to you and your client, which is fantastic, because then you can just quickly shoot that email to the lawyer and have the lawyer review it.
Is that booklet just for condos or freehold?
Freehold will not have a booklet. Condo apartments will have. And that basically, that booklet, the disclosure booklet, will have an outline of what the maintenance fees will look like, what the maintenance fees are charged for, what the percentage of a maintenance fee is per unit. It actually lists all the unit, what percentage according to the size of the unit, what's the maintenance fee on the parking spot, what's the maintenance fee on the locker space, how many parking spaces there are, how many visitors parking spaces there are, what's the reflected sort of maintenance or the management fee of the building, what is the reflected reserve fund that they're expecting to have on the building. So all of that will be, what are the rules and regulations surrounding the, pets and whatnot, but, not too very detailed information, because all of that will come with when the management company takes over the site with, and that is when the building is registered, and I'll talk about what that is. So just hold on to that. So once the deal is signed, in a lot of cases, they will give you a copy of the co-op to sign on the spot as your client is signing, so that you're basically secured your commission. A lot of times I'm finding that the developers are holding that back because your client has that 10-day cooling off period. And so they wait until the cooling off period or any extension thereof is finished and over, and that they received a mortgage pre-approval from you before they give you a copy of that co-op to sign. And that mortgage pre-approval, as well as the lawyer review of the agreement, is something that is very imperative within that 10-day cooling off period. So at the same time, when your client's lawyer is reviewing the paperwork, you want to also talk to the bank, or a mortgage broker in most cases is ideal, and make sure that your client is approved and basically pre-approved for this purchase, because the developers are now asking for that pre-approval letter. Before, you would just pre-qualify them and say, okay, you have another 4 years before you have to close on this unit, so let's not worry about it. But the banks are becoming more and more particular about this, and so the developer is asking for a very detailed mortgage pre-approval letter, which basically has to indicate that Mr. and Mrs. Smith are approved for an amount equivalent to this much, which represents about 80 to 75% of the purchase price, depending on how much down payment they're collecting from you. So if your client has to submit 25% deposit to the developer, they want the mortgage pre-approval amount not to be any less than 75%. It's okay if they're approved for more, but if they're approved for 65%, they're going to come and say, we're missing a 10% here. Where's that 10% going to be provided from? And it's fine, your client might have extra money sitting in the bank, but that letter has to indicate they're approved for this much, which is equivalent to 65%, and they have savings equivalent to that extra 10% to cover the entire 75%. So the letter has to be that detailed. And it has to indicate that this is a pre-approval for the purchase of unit 525 in such and such building. Yes?
What about if they are using, instead of getting a mortgage, they're going to be using a home credit line?
Then they have to get a letter from the bank indicating that the clients will have enough funds to cover this purchase for this amount. It has to be detailed. They still need a letter. So in most cases, I find it's easier to just get a pre-approval. If they have that line of credit, or they have enough savings, or that it's coming from the sale of their property, it might be just easier to provide a simple pre-approval letter as opposed to try and basically indicate in a letter that they're going to sell their home, then put that money in, you know what I mean? So just, they're going to be qualified as long as the bank's satisfied with that, then get a pre-approval letter. And so they are asking for that pre-approval. And then one of the reasons that they are very particular about this pre-approval letter is that when they go to their financing company for the development and the building of this building, their financing companies are now being very picky about, okay, who are your buyers? Are they qualified buyers? So unless the building has qualified buyers and can show that all of my purchasers are qualified for this purchase today, of course things change, then they will not be able to get financing very easily. So that's the reason for that pre-approval letter. So regardless of the fact, if you're signing at the time of signing or later on after the 10-day cooling off period is done, once you've signed a copy of that or the co-op agreement, what you want to do is that co-op agreement again has to be executed. There might be someone on site that can sign that for you. There might not be. What you want to do is ideally take a picture of that so that you have it for your record. When they give you that signed copy of it, and they might email it to you, and that's fine, make sure you get a photocopy of the front page of the agreement for your records so that you know what the name of the buyer was, what unit number your client has purchased. And in most cases, the information of the buyer is printed at the bottom of that agreement, of the first page of the agreement of purchase and sale. So their phone number, their date of birth, their SIN number, that's information that in the event you don't have the copy of a driver's license, you can fill out the FinTrack easily using that information. So get the copy, and I believe our office requires that first page of the agreement as well when you're submitting your deal checklist as well. So that's something good to have for your record as well as to submit into the office. So once you've done that, your job is pretty much done. You no longer have to accompany your clients every weekend when they want to show their auntie and their uncle what they've purchased, because your client might end up going in every weekend literally for the first few months just because they're so excited about this purchase. You no longer have to accompany them. You're done. As long as their checks are clearing, you're not going to be basically contacted. And so their checks will come out, and a couple of years down the road, when it's time for them to pick the colors of their unit, the color of the tile, the kind of the cabinet and whatnot, they're going to be contacted by the developer. At that point, your client might call you, might not call you to accompany them, and that's totally up to you how much you know, I mean, personally, I would probably accompany my client because you never know. You want to continue building that relationship with your clients. So it's okay to hold their hand and be there when they're choosing these colors. And, you know, in the event you are responsible for selling that unit down the road, you want to make sure they're choosing decent colors, because then you're going to be left with like brown floors and black cabinets, and it's going to be a tough sale. So just accompany them and make sure that they're picking decent colors and neutral colors and modern colors that, you know, are going to help them down the road in renting or selling the product eventually. And that's pretty much it. So the way it's going to happen is a few years down the road, they're going to be called to basically take occupancy of the unit. Occupancy of the unit is when the client is given a key and access to their unit, and the unit is deemed livable. The building might not be finished. It's only going to be safe. Basically, the elevator is going to be functioning. There is going to be something that resembles a lobby. In most cases, the lobby is not finished at the time of color selection, at the time of occupancy. There will be, if the building provides that 24 hours concierge, there will be a concierge on site. And that's about it. So the amenities are not done at this time. The floors usually above you are not completed. Your client will, in most cases, basically they're lucky if they have carpeting in the level of their unit. That's about it. It's basically bare minimum, and their units will have everything completed because they would have done their PDI. There has been these scary occasions where the client is given occupancy of a unit, in most cases detached freehold properties, where they didn't even have flushable toilets and whatnot. So, you know, I mean, when you have carry-on, your client's covered for these things, but and especially in condos, I don't see that very much. In detached properties and freehold properties is where I'm seeing that people are having a hard time with the developers getting them to deliver on what they promised. So the PDI is done prior to clients moving in, and that's called the pre-delivery inspection, is done prior to your client moving in, and that would have been their opportunity to indicate any deficiencies. Oh, there's a scratch on the wall and the fridge is leaning, and you know there's this laminate floor is popping up a little bit. And maybe if they're not sort of major deficiencies, they will still, your client will still have to take occupancy, and the developer will schedule a time to come in and fix those deficiencies. So your client gets the key to move into the unit. At this time, if it was scheduled for them to pay an extra deposit of 5% at occupancy, they would have made sure through their client's lawyer that that money was collected, as well as they usually ask for 12 post-dated checks for the amount of maintenance fee as well as your occupancy fee. So maintenance fee is going to be basically your maintenance fee, which would have been existing, even if they were owner of the property. But this occupancy fee is a fee your client is paying towards the unit, which does not go towards their purchase price or their mortgage. Because at this point, when they're taking occupancy, they're not officially the owner of the unit. The deed is not in their name. The unit hasn't been registered to their name. The unit is still owned by the developer, and your client is, in a way, renting from the developer. And, sorry, yes.
Quick question, because the maintenance fee that's coming out during occupancy, would it be lower rate than what would be normally, because they don't have all the amenities and stuff available to them?
They still pay it.
Oh,
Yeah. They don't basically prorate it according to what is available. Whatever was the estimated maintenance fee is what they're going to collect. And this occupancy fee is also referred to as a phantom mortgage, because in most cases, it is the equivalent amount of what your client's mortgage would have been, but they're only paying it as a rental fee to the builder. And this, sorry, go ahead.
That 5% that you pay on occupancy, is that check being given in the beginning when we sign, or a lawyer will collect?
No, they don't collect the check for occupancy, or even if there is a roof completion check at the time of signing, because they don't know the exact date. So closer to that period, usually if the builder's considered enough, they might give your client a couple of months notice, sometimes within a few weeks even, and your client has to sort of be prepared. Even occupancy could happen within, a very quick period of time. In a lot of cases, they don't give your client a very long notice so that they prepare themselves. So your client has to sort of be aware of where the building is at, because they will, in a lot of cases, they will inform you as well as your client of the groundbreaking of the building and of the progress of the construction. So they send, just to communicate with clients, the developers send pictures, oh, we're halfway done, oh, this is what the building is looking like now and whatnot. So you kind of are aware of what stage they're at, so you can anticipate that occupancy period, but in a lot of cases, you're not given a huge notice.
The occupancy fee is, you said it's about a mortgage amount, including the maintenance or with maintenance on top of that?
Maintenance on top.
Okay, and also, if you have a client with a lower level unit, because obviously they occupy like that.
Yes.
What's generally the time frame that they're going to be paying this fee?
So an occupancy period could last anywhere between 3 months to, I've seen 2 years. But that's not normal. I mean, about a year and a few months I've seen, but depends on the developer. If the developer is really good with their delivery period, and a lot of the builders that we work with, Pemberton Group, for example, tries out. Like these larger developers that are not so dependent on that financing period and they, in a lot of cases, they have their own in-house construction, basically, division and department. They're usually pretty good with their delivery time, and their occupancy periods are not very large, because at any given time they have so many projects on the go. They just rather quickly do their occupancy and be done with it, and not sit there, and they don't depend on that occupancy money. They just want to move on to the next project. You'll find that a lot of times it's the new developers and the smaller development companies that have that really extended period of occupancy. But, it is regulated somewhat, but not a lot. And the tarry on critical dates, that is part of the agreement, will outline what the maximum amount of delay is that the developers allow. But that period is so long that, the builders really protect it. Because if the builder doesn't deliver on certain dates that they've indicated, they actually have to pay the purchasers of these units a fine. So they will do whatever in their power not to have to pay the buyers a fine for delaying the project. At the same time, that period that they have, that window is so large that in most cases they don't reach it anyways. But so yeah, on average, the occupancy period is anywhere between, I usually tell everyone, 3 months to about a year, roughly speaking. And within that period, the rent checks are being collected by the builder. and the building is still being completed. So there's no active construction. The building on the outside is completed. They're just finishing the unit on the inside. And they're basically giving occupancy as they go up. And so people who've taken occupancy of the unit sooner are the ones that will close sooner. So they go according, the closings will come according to the occupancy schedule. In a lot of cases, you'll find that the developer will be able to close on the unit that is higher up. So a lot of times you'll find that penthouse units will not have an occupancy period, and that their occupancy and their final closing will fall at the same time frame. And so they're basically closing and going in completely, basically without having to pay an occupancy. That happens rarely. It doesn't happen very often, but it can happen. Where the occupancy period is completely, or if the buyer had bought later on, basically, and the unit was finished in the process before they bought it, and whatever the case might have been. So anyways, the occupancy period, however long it is, the reason they have this occupancy period is that because the city does not allow the developer to register this condominium within their departments until the building is about 80 to 90% occupied, and they have to basically meet certain criteria. So the building's elevator has to be functioning, obviously the garbage chutes have to be functioning, the amenities have to be done to a certain degree and whatnot, and that's when the building can be registered. And once they're registered, and that's when they start their closings. Yes?
Can the unit be rented, or can you rent that for a client during the occupancy?
So 99.9% of the people who buy as an investment will rent the unit within the occupancy period.
Even if you're not the legal owner?
They're not the legal owner, but they have taken occupancy of the unit. You'll find that a lot of developers, their agreement of purchase and sale indicates that the client is not allowed to rent the unit within their occupancy period. It actually says that on the agreement. Pemberton is one of the builders that actually indicates that, and they will not waive on that whatsoever. However, 99.9% of the buyers at Pemberton buildings rent within that occupancy period, and Pemberton just simply looks the other way. So, in a lot of cases, they will allow it, and they will just basically, they just don't want to allow it on paper just because there's liabilities for them, but everyone rents. Yes.
How they start closing from top to bottom?
The same schedule as they took occupancy. So if I'm on second floor and I took occupancy November, and someone on the 10th floor took occupancy next year, February, then I will close first, and then they will close later on.
So if you are to rent a property that's just occupied, not taken possession of, who is the landlord?
Your client is.
So you list even though they're not the legal owner of the property?
Yes, so you'll find that, absolutely, yes. Because they've taken occupancy and they're basically the intended owner of the unit. But the developer, some developers will actually go on MLS and call you up and say you're not allowed to post this on MLS and whatever.
Legally, are you allowed or not?
If it says it on the agreement, you're not allowed.
And there's HST implications for your client too. So if you're advising a client, be very careful, because the HST implication is huge if they rent it out and something goes wrong.
A lot of times the developers are asking you at the time of the worksheet completion whether your client is an investor or an end user, and they have to report that now just because of the fact that all these HST issues were happening. Yes, go ahead.
Have you ever had a case that, for example, the owner moved in at occupancy time, right? But then those occupancy, like the payment, the owner cannot use a mortgage to pay. The owner has to pay himself, right?
Yes.
So if let's say if the builder delay, it's supposed to be half a year, 1 year, and 1.5 years, and then the individual, the owner is like, wow, I'm paying over $1,000 every month. It's not from my mortgage. I'm getting into trouble with my finance. And then when are they gonna ever close? Like you said, the window is so big. So have you ever had a case that somebody's like, well, I can't afford to continue to occupy here anymore?
Well, even if they had a mortgage, they would have had to pay the mortgage. So that even if there was a mortgage in place, they would have been in trouble if they can't afford to pay the mortgage. But that's quite a legal procedure when it comes to these occupancy periods, and they can't simply walk away because I can't afford it, they're still liable.
But can they argue, it's like, well, I didn't expect.
If the developers,
It's 2 years already.
if it's within those critical dates indicated on the carry-on agreement, they can't argue it. It's indicated there
So
as that.
nothing this person can do, this
No,
owner can do.
in most cases, no, it's just
They can't
part of the
get
package.
financing from the occupancy?
No, they're not the owner of the unit, so their mortgage does not, they can't have a mortgage on a unit they don't own yet, right? This isn't registered. They're just renting from the builder. The builder is still the registered owner of this condominium or the townhouse. And so once the occupancy period is done, your client will then be notified. Yes, sir. The client will be notified through their lawyer that on such and such date, you're going to be closing on the unit. And that's when your client then has to prepare to have their mortgage, the mortgage paperwork ready, and make sure that their mortgage is in place, make sure the lawyer's informed of, in case that it is communicated directly to them. In most cases, it's communicated to the lawyer anyways. And just be ready for closing. They're going to ask for certain fees. Now, closing costs. So this is when their closing costs come into play. Closing costs are basically these levies and taxes and certain fees and such that have been passed on to your client by the developer. And these were all indicated in the agreement of purchase and sale, as well as that disclosure booklet. And that's the period at which your lawyer would have negotiated these closing costs. In general, the closing costs could be approximately about 2% of the purchase price. Sometimes a little bit less, sometimes a little bit more, but that's what you want to prepare your clients to be ready with, that kind of money, cash in their pocket. Does not come out of their mortgage, right? If they have a line of credit they could use towards that, but that could affect their mortgage standing as well. So just be careful with that. Make sure that they're prepared and are aware that these closing costs will come. And basically the developer will pass all these fees to your client, whatever they can. The fee that they've paid for the installation of the hydro lines and all the the connection fees for the hydro and electricity and all of that stuff is passed on to your client. Then they also will pass on to your clients all their photocopying and all the admin fee that they pay to their lawyer. They will pass on to your clients. They will also, there's of course the land transfer tax. There's the development charges and the levies. So that's usually the area where if a lawyer is, and your client's lawyer knows what they're doing, that they're going to cap that. That's where the developer will be flexible and will allow a capping. And by capping, what I mean is, if you don't cap, they will say, okay, I will cap the development and levies at $2,500, $4,500, whatever the amount is that the developer is willing to cap it at. It means that on final closing, on the disclosure statement and on the the outline of what the fees are, it will say development and levies $4,500. It will not exceed that amount that they capped it at. If they capped it at $10,000, it will be $10,000. In most cases, not less. But it will not go over that. So make sure that your lawyer, the client's lawyer, is able to knows what they're doing and is capping whatever it is that they can cap. Now, these caps might be certain portions of the cap might be included as part of the incentives that we talked about originally. So it might be part of the incentive that the developer says, I will do a capping of $2,500 on the one-bedroom unit. So it might be something that they will provide. But even within that development and levies clause, there are certain sections, and each section will indicate a certain fee. And so even though they might have capped section A and B of the development clause, there is still section E and F that the lawyer can ask for further capping. And so in some cases they do that. Yes.
Sorry.
Sure.
You mentioned that the buyer has to inform the builder if they're gonna be the end user or they're gonna rent. So if they say they're gonna rent, they will have to pay HST, right?
So that will basically come into play because a lot of things change. I might have indicated on my worksheet today that I'm going to be an end user, but in the interim, I get a job outside of the country and I actually will have to then rent the unit. At closing, your client's lawyer will basically indicate further whether this is gonna be a rental property or if it's gonna be an end user property. So, you know, because things change. So regardless of what you've put, I'm finding a lot of people are just putting end user on the worksheet now just because it's easier. But on registration, your lawyer, your client's lawyer will ask if they're gonna be end user.
Okay, yeah, and if the person rents the property and gets charged the HST, if the client has an HST number, can they deduct the HST?
That's a good question for the lawyer.
Okay.
You know, I mean, there's basically different criterias that apply, so it all depends. It all depends. Even as a rental property, someone might still qualify for an HST rebate. So it will debate this. It will basically be different for each individual. So that's something that they can talk to the lawyer about and see what it is that they qualify for or not.
So a huge cost for a developer in the beginning is the development cost for education and levies and start levies and all that. So they can break it down into the units and collect it at the end of closing?
Yes. Lawyers make a lot of money.
No, not the lawyers.
I mean, the developers make a lot of money in the interim. That's why there's so many of them building nowadays. I mean, there's a lot of money to be made there, yeah.
Is there a cap on the HST?
I don't believe there's a cap on the HST, but I'm not the best person to answer that question. I'm not gonna.
I think it's around 25,000. That's why I was just looking for confirmation.
I'm not sure.
Okay.
I'm sure we have lawyers that come into the academy and do courses on HST, on new construction and pre-construction, and they are the best persons to answer that question for you. I think there's still different.
Right, because going back to that scenario I was telling you, this lawyer told me that a lot of people didn't know about it, and then sometime of closing, he's like, well, I need another 23.5 for HST, and they're like, we don't have that.
Right.
Right, so.
This is a good question for the lawyer.
Okay.
They take they close on the unit and pay the extra closing costs and whatnot, and their mortgage is in place now, and they are officially the owner of this unit. If they had been living inside the unit during the occupancy period, then they continue to live in the unit. If they hadn't been and it was renting, you know, everything in terms of the occupancy of the unit remains the same, but they're now the legal owner of the property and their mortgage starts. In some cases, during that period where the occupancy is happening, the management companies might change, the maintenance fees might change. So within the first few years, that's where you see the biggest jump in the maintenance fee, because the developers are trying to keep that maintenance fee low at the time of marketing a product, in order to entice people, oh, you know, this is something I can afford, it's something I can afford. But once the management company takes over, then they review the charges and all the costs for the building and the reserve fund and whatnot. And so they will, in a few years' time, change the maintenance fees and divide it up by the number of units, and everyone has to pay a higher maintenance fee now to make up for the reserve fund and whatever deficiencies there might be. So an assignment. What is an assignment? Assignment, yes.
Could you explain about education charges?
That's part of your closing cost. So every city and township has a certain amount that's called educational charges that is reflected and passed on to the builder as part of the closing costs. And for occupying this space basically and being an owner. And many of us basically pay that as part of our property taxes anyways. So it's reflected to the developer, and the developer will pass it on to your buyers. So the assignment. Assignment is when your client has made a purchase at a new construction site, and they have this agreement of purchase and sale. The building might not even be built yet. Or it might be built, but they haven't taken occupancy. In some cases, they have taken occupancy already, but they decide to basically not close on the unit. They decide, okay, I can no longer afford this unit. I don't know if I can live in it, or, you know, my circumstances have changed for whatever reason. I want out of this deal. And so they choose to sell the unit. And when they're selling this, now they're selling the agreement of purchase and sale. They're not actually selling a unit because this unit does not exist. And so that's called an assignment agreement, where the client is selling their right to this unit. In a lot of cases, the developer will cooperate, and you basically your clients will have to ask permission to assign a unit. So their lawyer will contact the developer's lawyer and says, my client would like to assign their unit. Depending on where the building is, what stage their sales are at, because every builder will have their own criteria in order to allow this assignment to take place. But in a lot of cases, if the site is sold out or that particular model is sold out, they might be a little bit more open to the idea. If the building is, if their financing is in place, they are probably more inclined to allow assignments. So whatever their rules and regulations are, if your client meets those criteria, then they will allow in writing for your client to assign their unit. But they will, in 99.9% of the cases, indicate you are not allowed to list this on MLS. So it has to be an exclusive listing agreement that you do for your client, and that you can advertise it on sites that we have, Broker Bay, as well as our Facebook pages, as well as our Haves Wants. Those are areas where you could advertise it potentially, and it just has to be by word of mouth, really. You can, I've seen a lot of people post them on Kijiji and Craigslist as well, because you can't put it on MLS. So once you've basically advertised it and you find a buyer, your buyer, and the way you come up with this price, and I mean, this could be a whole course on its own, but I'll quickly go into the details. The way you come up with a price for this assignment is whatever your client paid at the time they purchased. You want to take into consideration what the unit is worth today. So if there are still units remaining at the developer's site, that would be a good indication of how much the prices have gone up, because they go according to the market as well. Or basically potential competition sites that are offering units similar to this. That could be a good indicator of what the property is worth. A lot of times people will basically look into the resale market to see what today's market value is for this property if they were to sell it. And so you want to basically make sure to add your commission on top of that, and the commission to cooperating agent. And the difference in amount will then be the amount of money your client is making in the interim. So in most cases, we all know these properties grow in value. By the time they become the owner of it, there's already a lot of equity built in that property. And so this buyer is wanting to walk away with that built equity now. And so you'll, once you get an offer or you want to basically negotiate an agreement on behalf of your client, that is when you indicate how much this basically unit has grown and how much money they're going to make on top of the purchase price that they paid, as well as the fact where this money is going. Is it going to be held in trust until final closing and then released to your buyer, or is a percentage released to the buyer now and then another percentage? So these are all terms that can be negotiated throughout the agreement. Obviously, your buyer would want to take as much money as they can now and walk away with it. But keep in mind, even if that is the case, your client is going to be liable until final close, until this new purchaser has completely fulfilled their obligation with the developer and have closed on the unit. If at any time they don't close on the unit, your client is still on the hook. And a lawyer is a great person to get involved with very early on with an assignment, just because there's a lot of details and a lot of basically little loopholes that you want to be comfortable with. And so get a lawyer on board right away when you're doing assignments. Any questions? Yes.
Maybe an inadequate question, but if the new buyer of the assignment sale gets possession on closing when the building is registered, who gets to use the property during the occupancy period?
So your client's assigned already?
Yeah, let's say my client is the original buyer who bought pre-construction.
Yes.
And now he sold the property as an assignment sale to a new buyer.
Yeah, so the new buyer gets occupancy.
Okay, the new buyer gets occupancy.
Absolutely, absolutely. So your client's going to be the assignor and they're going to be the assignee. So the assignee is going to be the person who takes occupancy. They're responsible for paying that 5% on occupancy if it was scheduled, for example. But all those terms can be negotiated on the agreement. But they take occupancy and they're paying occupancy period. And if they want to move in or rent it, they're the one who's doing it.
But the builder is in touch with the original buyer, not with
No. So that's why you want the developer on board with the assignment, because once your client and the new buyer come to an agreement then your client's lawyer will communicate to the developer's lawyer that, okay, my client has assigned their right, and this is the name of the new purchaser, and the new purchaser will, in most cases, will need to be pre-qualified by the buyer, by the developer as well, and in some cases, they might ask for mortgage pre-approval by the new buyer as well. So the lawyers of the developer are very much involved in the process of the assignment and are aware of who the new buyer is.
And my client's lawyer, who he was dealing with the pre-construction phase, he's experienced with dealing with pre-construction.
One
He
would
would
hope.
know what to do, right?
What one would hope.
Okay.
Yeah, in most cases they are.
Did you comment on the assignment fees? I missed that if you did.
Assignment fee on
Yeah, like how much is it usually? How does it work? In some cases, the developer might also not allow assignments.
Right. So if the developer does not allow assignments, and that's the case closed, you can't do anything about it. If they do allow assignments, in most cases, there will be a fee. Developer wants a piece of this pie that your client is basically walking away with. Okay, why should so-and-so be entitled to make thousands of dollars on a product that I sold 5 years ago? I want a piece of the pie. So a lot of developers charge a $5,000 fee. $5,000 is pretty much industry standard. Keep in mind they will reflect the cost of the lawyers as well onto your buyer. So it might say $5,000, but in fine print it will say in the details of